The first light of dawn over San Francisco had not yet broken through the fog, but the house was already divided. On one side of the bed, Ethan lay awake, his body aching from a week of wrestling with stubborn earth. He smelled of the outside world, damp soil, redwood mulch, and metal, a scent that clung to him despite his scrubbing. He swung his legs onto the cold Italian marble floor, a surface so out of place with the man he was that it felt like a daily joke. He looked at his hands in the gray light, thick calluses, dirt etched into the knuckles, honest hands that built walls to outlast the houses they protected. He glanced at Genevieve, asleep under a mountain of pristine white linen. Even in slumber, she exuded expensive maintenance, the scent of her $1,000 night cream a sharp contrast to his earthy presence. In these quiet moments, the chasm between them felt most profound, filled with unspoken resentments and the weight of her expectations. He padded silently to the closet, his eyes finding the object that had become a silent battleground, his grandfather's weathered canvas backpack. Faded and stained with oil, it was an act of defiance in her curated space. To her, it was a symbol of the smallness she tried to escape. To Ethan, it was a vault containing a history, a promise, and a secret heavy enough to sink the floorboards. Today, its contents would change everything. He carried the backpack into the cavernous living room, a space that felt more like a showroom than a home. The air was cool, carrying the ghost of Genevieve's aggressive tuberose perfume. Ethan placed the bag on the polished concrete coffee table. It smelled of old leather and his grandfather's pipe tobacco, a scent of authenticity in a shrine to manufactured success. If you're captivated by the weight of history and secrets waiting to be unearthed, subscribe now. You won't want to miss how a simple inheritance can unravel a life built on lies. With a deep breath, Ethan unzipped the bag. The gritty rasp sounded like the tearing of their life's fabric. Inside, beneath a spare leather cord and worn work gloves, lay the real treasures. He brushed his fingers against a heavy steel object wrapped in oilcloth, but didn't remove it. Instead, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger filled with his grandfather's spidery script. It was a meticulous record of plantings, harvests, and land acquisitions dating back to the 1940s, a testament to patience and foresight. This book was his anchor against Genevieve's relentless social ambition. Genevieve's voice, sharp and imperious, sliced through his reflection. She was on the phone in the bedroom, already commanding. "No, Jean-Pierre. The Dom Perignon Rosé is non-negotiable. This is for the Blackwood estate." The name had been a constant refrain for 6 months. Securing the mythical Napa Valley vineyard for their 10-year vow renewal was her magnum opus, proof she had conquered old money society. She never spoke of the cost, waving away his concerns with vague talk of sponsors, but he had seen the credit card statements. The debt was a living thing in their house, threatening to crush his small landscaping business. He listened to her finalize the order, feeling a profound pity. She was so focused on the performance, she had forgotten to check the foundations of the stage. Later, as she coordinated final details in the kitchen, he tried one last time. "Jen," he said calmly, "we need to talk about the final bill. It's more than I'll make in a decade." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Ethan, not today. Today is about celebrating us." When he persisted, she cut him off with a laugh devoid of humor. "Ethan, darling, stop thinking so small. This isn't an expense, it's an investment. The people at this party are the future. Your business builds rock walls, mine builds an empire. This party is the coronation." He absorbed the blow, the familiar reminder of his inadequacy. He saw clearly that they were speaking different languages. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Jen." The fight left him, replaced by a chilling stillness. It was the calm of a man who had stopped trying to save someone determined to drown. He retreated to his small office, the only space that felt like his. He sat at his wooden desk and unwrapped the object from the backpack, a vintage steel watch. It was a tool, not a luxury item, its crystal scratched from a hard life. It had been his grandfather's. "Time is the only thing you can't buy, boy," the old man had told him. "A smart man works with it. He plants a seed and waits." Ethan wound the crown, the rhythmic tick-tock, a comforting sound of patience and purpose. A world away from Genevieve's frantic race for status. He slipped the heavy steel watch onto his wrist. It was a grounding presence, a physical reminder of his promise to be a steward of a legacy she openly mocked. The ticking was a countdown, not to her triumph, but to a reckoning. The evening descended with suffocating tension. Genevieve moved through the house like a whirlwind of silk and diamonds. When she saw Ethan in his simple navy wool suit, her face flickered with panic, masked by irritation. "Ethan," she said tightly, "is that what you're wearing?" She fussed aggressively with his tie. "You just don't get it. Tonight is a performance. Every detail must be perfect. You're the one variable I can't control." The words hung between them, a brutal admission that he was a problem to be managed. He looked into her eyes and saw a stranger, a curator obsessed with the exhibition rather than the art. "I'm ready when you are," he said, devoid of emotion. The drive north was a journey through two separate realities. Inside the hermetically sealed German sedan, Genevieve was a general in her command center, firing off texts and emails. Ethan drove in silence, watching the San Francisco glass give way to the rolling hills of Marine. He saw the land as a living system, noting soil color and vine health, a language his grandfather had taught him. In the back seat sat the canvas backpack, a dusty chaperone from another era. Genevieve hadn't even noticed it. To her, it was clutter. To him, it was the arsenal for the war he was about to wage. Arrival at the Blackwood estate marked a shift to cultivated perfection. Ancient olive trees lined the driveway. The stone house stood as a legacy of endurance. Genevieve was out of the car before it stopped, already barking orders about lighting. She didn't look back at him. He was an afterthought. He watched her go and felt a profound release. Her self-absorption gave him the opportunity he needed. He grabbed the backpack and headed away from the glittering terrace, toward the quiet, working heart of the estate. He found the old pump house behind the main cellars. The key from his backpack's side pocket turned the lock with a satisfying clunk. The air inside smelled of old paper and his grandfather's pipe tobacco. This was reality. He placed the backpack on the scarred oak desk and unzipped it. From the interior pocket, he pulled a thick, waterproof folio. He was not an intruder here. He was the rightful heir stepping into his inheritance. He laid the documents on the desk. First, the deed for the Blackwood estate, describing a kingdom. He traced the signature line, Alistair Cole, his grandfather, and below it, Ethan Cole, sole beneficiary. Next, the charter for the irrevocable trust designed to protect the land from short-sighted greed. Finally, a letter from his grandfather. "Money that is not earned is a poison. I have watched you build your own life, an honest one. You have character. This land is a responsibility. Never let it be used to prop up illusions." A sharp rap on the door shattered the silence. Ethan slid the papers under a soil atlas just as Mr. Albright, the estate manager, entered. Albright's stern face softened into respect. "Mr. Cole," he said, closing the door. "I thought I might find you here." The validation was immense. "Everything is in order," Albright continued. "The invoices for tonight's event are prepared. Your wife demanded a case of 1996 Salon Le Mesnil. It costs over $3,000 a bottle." In Albright's gaze, a pact was sealed. He was an ally who had witnessed Genevieve's arrogance and was ready for justice. "It will be my distinct pleasure, Mr. Cole." Alone again, Ethan gathered the documents back into the folio and returned them to the backpack, leaving it on the desk. He walked to the window, seeing his reflection not as the small man Genevieve saw, but as Alistair Cole's grandson. The suit was no longer a costume of inadequacy, but a uniform of dignity. He stepped out into the golden afternoon light. The party noise, violins, laughter, sounded distant, like a parade he wasn't part of. He was the foundation upon which her fantasy was built, and he was about to show her how fragile it was. He walked toward the party, the air thick with expensive perfumes and cut grass. Genevieve met him halfway, shimmering in silver but with panic in her eyes. "Ethan!" she hissed, angling her body away from him. "You can't just stand there. You're ruining the aesthetic." She lowered her voice. "Go to the catering tent. Put on a server jacket. Just blend in. Help serve champagne. It's better than explaining what you do." The request landed with a dull thud. He was a prop, a blemish to be hidden. He looked at the sea of wealth, then back at her desperate fury. A profound stillness settled over him. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Jen." He saw her relief, unaware that his compliance was the first move of his offensive. He changed into the ill-fitting black polyester jacket, vanishing into anonymity. Tray in hand, he moved through the crowd as a ghost, refilling glasses for billionaires who looked right through him. From this vantage, he watched his wife perform. She was flawless, laughing, touching arms, desperate to maintain the illusion. He felt a cold, sharp pity. She was a stranger. Hours later, passing a secluded alcove, he saw Genevieve's purse on a bench, a sheaf of papers sticking out from a crimson legal folder labeled Sterling and Croft. He recognized the firm. Dread tightened his gut. He stepped into the shadows and pulled the folder free. The cover letter read, Marital Settlement Agreement. It wasn't a prenup. It was a divorce settlement. He read the dense pages. She kept the house, the car, the art. He got his truck. Then he saw Article 9, a vicious non-disclosure agreement barring him from ever speaking about her. The vow renewal wasn't a celebration. It was her coming out party before she jettisoned him. The pain was white-hot, then froze into clarifying rage. She had used his stability as scaffolding to build her ambition, and now she was kicking it away. He carefully replaced the folder, wiping his palms on the cheap jacket. He stepped back into the light, a different man. The quiet landscape architect was gone. In his place stood the grandson of Alistair Cole. He watched her across the terrace, laughing, secure in her victory, oblivious that the servant she had created was the king of her castle. He picked up a fresh tray, playing the part of the patient predator. The perfect moment to strike was approaching. He sat for a moment in the dusty solitude of the office. The encounter with Mr. Albright had been the final piece of armor. He wasn't just a man with a secret. He was the master of the house, supported by his grandfather's legacy. He gathered the documents, sliding the deed, trust charter, and letter back into the waterproof folio, tying it and placing it deep within the canvas backpack. He zipped the bag shut, a definitive sound closing one chapter and opening another. He left the backpack on the desk where it belonged. He stood and walked to the grimy window, seeing his reflection against the manicured lawns. A man in a simple dark suit with rough hands. For years he had seen that reflection through Genevieve's eyes. Lacking, small, unfit for her world. Now he saw his grandfather's grandson, a man who understood soil, stone, and integrity. The suit was not a costume of inadequacy, but a uniform of dignity. He took a deep breath, inhaling history and earth. The steady ticking of the watch on his wrist was a reassuring heartbeat. Tick-tock, the sound of inevitable truth. He opened the office door and stepped into the golden late afternoon light. The party sounds rushed in, violins, clinking glasses, brittle laughter. But the noise felt distant, a frivolous parade far below. He was walking back into Genevieve's world, but no longer as a participant. He was the foundation of her fantasy, about to show her how fragile her stage truly was. He saw her across the lawn, a shimmering silver vision, gesturing to him with a sharp, impatient flick of her wrist. The moment of his planned humiliation was upon him, but he walked toward her with the unshakable calm of a mountain. He approached her through the thick, perfumed air of fresh grass and expensive champagne. The string quartet played forgettable classical music. Genevieve met him halfway, her silver dress catching the dying sun. She was a vision of curated perfection, but as she drew close, her smile vanished, replaced by cold panic. She angled her body away, as if his presence might tarnish her gown. "Ethan, darling," she hissed, the endearment a weapon. "You can't just stand by the service entrance. You're ruining the aesthetic." He said nothing, simply looked at this beautiful, terrifying stranger. Her agitation grew. "Look," she whispered, voice laced with steel. "I need you to do something. Go to the catering tent. Put on a black server jacket. Just blend in. Help serve champagne. It's better than having you stand around awkwardly explaining what you do. You can be useful." The request landed with a dull thud. It was the final, brutal confirmation. He was not her partner. He was a prop, a problem to be managed. He looked past her at the sea of designer tuxedos, then back at the desperate fury in her eyes. A profound stillness settled over him. He nodded slowly. He saw her relief, unaware that his compliance was not submission, but the first move in a war she didn't know had begun. He turned and walked toward the catering tents. The music now sounded like a funeral dirge for his marriage. Inside the tent, amidst the smells of garlic and sweat, a manager pointed him to a rack of jackets. He swapped his navy wool coat for a stiff, cheap polyester server jacket. It fit poorly, a physical reminder that he didn't belong. He picked up a silver tray of champagne flutes, the weight negligible yet heavy with meaning. He re-entered the party as an anonymous server. The transformation was immediate. Guests looked right through him. He moved like a ghost, refilling glasses for billionaires complaining about taxes. From this spectral vantage, he watched his wife. She was radiant, laughing, touching arms, performing the role of her life. He saw the desperate effort behind the illusion, and felt a cold, sharp pity. He was watching a stranger, mourning the man who had loved her without seeing the truth. An hour later, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ethan passed a secluded alcove where Genevieve had left her handbag. Tucked inside was a sheaf of papers in a familiar crimson folder from the law firm Sterling & Croft. He recognized it instantly, the firm that drafted their prenup. Dread tightened his gut. He stepped into the shadows and pulled the folder free. The scent of her tuberose perfume clung to the leather. He opened it. The cover letter read, Marital Settlement Agreement, Genevieve Allister versus Ethan Cole. It wasn't a prenup, it was a divorce settlement. He flipped through the thick document. She kept the house, the car, the art. He got his truck and tools. Then he saw Article 9, a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement barring him from ever speaking about her. The vow renewal wasn't a celebration. It was her coming out party before she discarded him. The pain was a physical blow, a white-hot spike through his chest. He had been a stepping stone. He stood in the shadows, the initial pain receding into cold, clarifying rage. Every condescending comment, every dismissal clicked into place. She had used his stability to build her ambition, and was now kicking the scaffolding away. He looked at his calloused hands, hands that built walls and held her, and saw them as she did, the hands of a servant. The humiliation of serving champagne was symbolic. He was the help. The love he once felt hardened into a fossilized stone in his chest. With chilling calm, he folded the documents back into the folder and returned it to her bag, leaving no trace. He wiped his palms on the cheap jacket, cleansing himself of her. He stepped back into the golden light, a different man. The quiet landscape architect was gone. In his place stood the grandson of Alistair Cole, a man who now understood the war waged against him. He watched her across the terrace, laughing, secure in her victory, oblivious that the servant she created was the king of the castle. He picked up a fresh tray, playing the part of the patient predator. The perfect moment to strike was approaching. He sat for a moment longer in the quiet solitude of the office, the dust motes settling in the still air. The brief, validating encounter with Mr. Albright had been the final piece of armor clicking into place. He was no longer just a man with a secret. He was the master of the house, supported by the foundations of loyalty his grandfather had built. He carefully gathered the documents, his movements now unhurried and deliberate. He slid the deed, the trust charter, and the precious letter back into the waterproof folio, tied the cord, and placed it deep within the canvas backpack. He zipped the bag shut, the sound final and definitive, like the closing of a book on one chapter of his life and the opening of another. He left the backpack on the desk. It belonged here, in this room of substance. Its purpose served. He would retrieve it later, after the storm had passed. He stood up and walked to the grimy window, looking at his own reflection superimposed over the distant view of the manicured lawns. He saw a man in a simple, dark suit, a man whose hands were rough and whose face was etched with the lines of outdoor work. For years, he had seen that reflection through Genevieve's eyes, seeing a man who was lacking, who was small, who didn't fit into her glittering world. But now, he saw something different. He saw his grandfather's grandson. He saw a man who understood the value of soil, the patience of stone, and the integrity of a promise. The suit was not a costume of inadequacy. It was the uniform of his own quiet dignity. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of history and earth, and held it, letting the calm settle deep into his bones. The ticking of the watch on his wrist was a steady, reassuring heartbeat. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was the sound of inevitable truth, of a reckoning that had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment to arrive. He opened the office door and stepped out into the golden light of the late afternoon. The sounds of the party rushed in to meet him, the soaring notes of a violin, the clinking of glasses, the bright, brittle peals of laughter. But the noise no longer felt overwhelming. It was distant, like the sound of a parade passing by on a street far below, a frivolous spectacle that had nothing to do with him. He was walking back into Genevieve's world, but he was no longer a participant. He was the foundation upon which her entire fantasy was built, and he was about to show her just how fragile her stage truly was. He saw her across the lawn, a shimmering silver vision, and she was gesturing to him, a sharp, impatient flick of her wrist, her perfectly composed face marred by a flash of irritation. The moment of his planned humiliation was upon him, but he walked toward her with the unshakable calm of a mountain, about to remind the wind just how powerless it really was. He walked toward her, a man moving through a dream that was not his own. The air was a thick, intoxicating cocktail of scents. The sweet green perfume of freshly cut grass, the yeasty promise of expensive champagne, and the overlapping clouds of a dozen different designer fragrances worn by the guests. A collective aroma of immense, almost oppressive, wealth. The string quartet was playing something light and classical, a piece of music so elegantly forgettable, it served only as an auditory texture, a sound designed to fill the spaces between conversations about acquisitions and summering in the Hamptons. Genevieve met him halfway across the manicured lawn, her silver dress catching the dying rays of the sun, making her shimmer like a mirage. She was a vision of curated perfection, from the flawless sweep of her hair to the calculated warmth of the smile she had been wearing all evening. But as she drew close, the smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, controlled panic. Her eyes, which he once thought held galaxies of affection, now darted around, checking to see who might be watching this unwelcome interaction. She didn't touch him. Instead, she angled her body slightly away, as if his very presence might tarnish the fabric of her gown. "Ethan, darling," she began, her voice a low, urgent hiss. The word darling, a weapon, not an endearment. "What are you doing? You can't just stand there by the service entrance like some lost child. You're ruining the aesthetic. People are starting to notice." He said nothing, simply looked at her, at this beautiful, terrifying stranger who wore his wife's face. The silence seemed to agitate her further. "Look," she said, her voice dropping even lower, a conspiratorial whisper laced with steel. "I need you to do something for me. For us. Go back to the catering tent. They have spare black server jackets. Just blend in. Help serve the champagne. It's better, honestly. It's better than having you stand around awkwardly, forced to explain what you do for a living to these people. It's a solution. You can be useful, and I won't have to worry." The request, a command wrapped in the thinnest veneer of suggestion, landed not with a sting, but with a dull, heavy thud in the pit of his stomach. It was the final, brutal confirmation of everything he had come to understand. He was not her partner in life. He was a prop, and a poorly chosen one at that. A piece of set dressing that clashed with the overall production. He looked past her, at the sea of designer tuxedos and couture gowns, at the faces of people who measured a man's worth by the size of his portfolio, and then he looked back at her, at the desperate, pleading fury in her eyes. And in that moment, a profound, chilling stillness settled over him, a calm so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion of acquiescence. He saw the flash of relief in her eyes, the way her shoulders relaxed as she registered his compliance, never once suspecting that his obedience was not an act of submission, but the first move in a war she didn't even know had been declared. He turned without a word, and walked toward the bustling white tents of the catering area, the soaring music of the quartet now sounding like a funeral dirge for the marriage he once believed in. The air here was different, thick with the honest, chaotic smells of real work. Sizzling garlic, hot metal, and the sweat of the small army of chefs, servers, and bussers who were the invisible gears making Genevieve's perfect clockwork evening tick. A harried catering manager, seeing his suit, pointed him toward a rack of jackets without even asking his name. He was just another body to be put to use. He shrugged off his own navy wool jacket, the one that had felt so dignified just an hour before, and slipped on the generic black one. The fabric was cheap polyester, stiff and slightly scratchy against his skin, a world away from the soft, worn canvas of his grandfather's backpack. It fit poorly, tight across his broad shoulders, a physical reminder that he did not belong here, in this uniform, in this role. He picked up a polished silver tray, its surface already dotted with perfectly filled champagne flutes, the tiny bubbles rising in frantic, celebratory streams. The weight was negligible compared to the stone and timber he was used to, yet it felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. He stepped out from behind the tents and re-entered the party, no longer as Ethan Cole, the husband, but as an anonymous extension of the service staff. The transformation was immediate and absolute. He was invisible. The same guests who might have offered a polite, strained nod earlier now looked directly through him, their eyes focused on the champagne, not the hand that offered it. He moved through the crowd, a ghost in a borrowed jacket, his movements quiet and efficient. He refilled the glass of a tech billionaire who was loudly complaining about the capital gains tax, and offered a flute to a woman dripping in diamonds who was laughing about firing her personal shopper. He was a silent witness, a confessor who heard everything and was seen by no one. From this new, spectral vantage point, he watched his wife. She was in her element, a radiant sun around which all the other celestial bodies of this social universe seemed to orbit. She laughed, her head tilted back at the perfect angle. She touched a famous venture capitalist's arm with a gesture of practiced intimacy. She was performing the role of her life, and she was flawless. He saw the sheer, desperate effort behind it all, the immense energy she was expending to maintain this glittering illusion, and he felt a cold, sharp pity that was entirely devoid of warmth. He was watching a woman he had never truly known, and he was mourning a man, the man he used to be, who had loved her without seeing the truth. An hour bled into another, the sun dipping below the distant hills, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The estate's sophisticated lighting system flickered on, casting a warm, golden glow over the terrace, making the entire scene look even more like a meticulously crafted film set. Ethan's tray was empty again, and he was heading back toward the catering tents for a fresh supply when he passed a small, secluded alcove off the main terrace. Genevieve had commandeered it as a personal staging area. Her ridiculously expensive brand-name handbag sat on a small stone bench next to a half-empty glass of champagne and her constantly buzzing phone. He wouldn't have given it a second glance, but a sheaf of papers, tucked into a familiar-looking crimson legal folder, was sticking out of the unzipped purse. He recognized the folder instantly. It was from the law firm of Sterling and Croft, the same firm that had drafted their prenuptial agreement a decade ago, the one she had insisted upon to protect her future earnings. At the time, he had found it clinical and a bit insulting, but he had agreed, seeing it as a strange quirk of her ambition. Now, seeing that crimson folder here tonight, a cold knot of dread tightened in his gut. It made no sense. Why would she bring legal documents to their vow renewal? He paused, hidden in the shadows of a large potted olive tree. The sounds of the party seemed to fade into a distant murmur. His heart began to beat a heavy, deliberate rhythm against his ribs. He looked around. No one was paying him any attention. He was just a server, part of the scenery. The temptation to know, the sudden, urgent need to understand this final, glaring piece of the puzzle, was overwhelming. With a glance over his shoulder, he stepped into the alcove. His hand, the one that could set a 200-pound stone with perfect precision, trembled slightly as he reached for the folder. The leather of her purse was impossibly soft, the texture of a life he had helped fund but could never truly touch. He pulled the folder free, the smooth paper sliding out with a soft, conspiratorial whisper. He held his breath, the scent of her tuberose perfume clinging to the leather, a cloying, suffocating smell of sweet decay. He was holding a secret, he knew, one that was never meant for him to see. And he had the sickening feeling that once he looked inside, the last fragile pane of glass protecting him from the truth would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. He opened the folder, his fingers feeling thick and clumsy. The top document was a cover letter on Sterling and Croft's heavy, cream-colored letterhead. His eyes scanned the first line, and the air left his lungs in a silent, painful rush. Marital settlement agreement. Genevieve Allister versus Ethan Cole. It wasn't a prenup, it was a postnup, a divorce settlement. His mind struggled to process the words, the cold, legalistic language, a brutal contrast to the romantic fantasy being enacted just a few yards away. He flipped past the cover letter, his hands now unnervingly steady. The document itself was thick, over 30 pages long, a meticulously crafted blueprint for his complete and utter erasure from her life. He forced himself to read, his gaze jumping from clause to clause, each one a separate, calculated blow. There was a section on the division of assets. She would retain the San Francisco house, which was in her name, along with all its contents, which she had purchased. She would keep her car, her art collection, her investment portfolio. He, in turn, would be entitled to his landscaping truck and the tools of his trade. A small, bitter laugh escaped his lips. The next section detailed spousal support. It proposed a one-time, nuisance value payout to him, a paltry sum that was contingent on his immediate vacating of the property and his signature on the final page. And then he saw it, the part that made the blood run cold in his veins. Article 9, Confidentiality and Non-Disparagement. It was a viciously comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, an NDA that would legally bar him from ever speaking about their marriage, her business dealings, her clients, or her personal life to anyone, for any reason, in perpetuity. Violation would result in catastrophic financial penalties. She wasn't just planning to divorce him, she was planning to buy his silence, to surgically remove him from her history as she ascended to the next level of her social stratosphere. The vow renewal, this entire impossibly expensive spectacle, wasn't a celebration of their past 10 years. It was her coming out party, the grand finale of her life with him before she jettisoned him like so much excess baggage. The pain was a physical thing, a white-hot spike driving through his chest, so intense it made him gasp. He had been a fool, a stepping stone on her path to glory, and this party was his public execution. He just hadn't known it yet. He stood there in the shadows, the legal papers clutched in his hand, the ink a testament to a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. The initial searing pain began to recede, not fading away, but changing its state, like water freezing into something solid, sharp, and brutally clear. The hurt was still there, a deep, foundational crack in his soul, but it was now encased in a thick layer of cold, clarifying rage. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a shouting match. It was the quiet, absolute fury of a man who finally sees the entire, ugly picture with perfect, crystalline precision. Every condescending comment about his small life, every pitying glance when he came home covered in honest dirt, every dismissive wave of her hand when he questioned her spending, it all clicked into place. It had never been about a difference in lifestyle. It had been a calculated, long-term strategy. She had used him. She had used his stability, his quiet, dependable income that paid the mortgage in the early years, his emotional support, his very presence as a humble, non-threatening husband, as the scaffolding from which she could build her glittering tower of ambition. And now that the tower was complete, she was preparing to kick the scaffolding away, leaving him to fall while she hosted a party on the rooftop. He thought of his grandfather, the man she had mocked as a dirt-poor farmer, a man whose entire life had been a testament to integrity, to building things that last, to promises kept. He looked down at his own calloused hands, hands that had built walls, planted gardens, and held her when she cried, and he saw them now as she must have seen them all along, as the hands of a servant. The humiliation she had planned for him tonight, making him serve champagne to her new, powerful friends, was not a spur-of-the-moment cruelty. It was a symbolic gesture, the perfect metaphor for their entire relationship. He was the help. He had always been the help. The love he had once felt for her was not just dead. It had become a fossil, a cold, hard stone in his chest, and he knew it was a stone he would soon have to throw. With a newfound, chilling calm, he carefully, meticulously, folded the documents and slid them back into the crimson folder. He placed the folder back inside her handbag, positioning it exactly as he had found it, leaving no trace of his discovery. His movements were precise, economical, the movements of a man with a clear and unwavering purpose. He wiped his palms on the cheap polyester of the borrowed jacket, erasing the phantom feel of her expensive leather purse, cleansing himself of her. He stepped out of the alcove, leaving the shadows behind, and walked back into the golden light of the party. But he was a different man. The quiet landscape architect, the accommodating husband, the man who had weathered 1,000 small humiliations with patient resignation, was gone. In his place stood the grandson of Alistair Cole, the steward of a legacy of patience and strength, a man who now understood the full scope of the war that had been silently waged against him. He looked across the terrace and saw her, a shimmering vision of success, laughing with the very people she believed would be her future. She was so confident, so secure in her victory, completely oblivious to the fact that the man she had just tried to relegate to the role of a servant was, in fact, the king of the very castle she was celebrating in. The ticking of his grandfather's watch on his wrist was no longer just a comforting rhythm. It was a metronome, counting down the final beats to the performance of a lifetime. His performance. He picked up another tray of champagne, the crystal flutes gleaming under the lights, and began to move through the crowd, his face an unreadable mask of professional deference. He was no longer playing the part of a humiliated husband. He was playing the part of a patient predator, and he knew the perfect moment to strike was fast approaching. Here is the text for Act 4, paragraphs 19 to 24, written according to your specific instructions. The crimson folder felt like a brand on his skin, a physical manifestation of the betrayal that now coursed through his veins like a fever. He slid it back into the buttery leather of her handbag, his movements unnervingly precise, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm raging within him. He did not feel the urge to scream, to shatter the crystal flutes, to confront her in a blaze of righteous fury. That was her style, the dramatic, public performance. His anger was different. It was cold, silent, and ancient, like the stones he used to build his walls, a force of immense, quiet pressure. He needed sanctuary, a place to think, a place where the suffocating scent of her tuberose perfume could not reach him. He slipped away from the alcove, his server's jacket rendering him invisible once more, and moved past the frantic heat of the catering tents, past the neatly parked luxury cars, toward the dark, quiet silhouette of the vineyard's original barn. The air here was clean and honest, smelling of hay, old redwood, and the rich, damp earth between the vines. He found a small, unlocked tack room, a space forgotten by the evening's opulence. Inside, the scent of leather polish and saddle soap was a grounding antidote to the cloying sweetness of the party. He sat on a dusty wooden bench, the splintered wood a welcome, real texture beneath his hands. In the dim light filtering from the distant terrace, he pulled out his phone. The screen glowed, a portal out of this nightmare. His fingers, which had trembled when he touched her purse, were now rock steady. He scrolled through his contacts, past the names of suppliers and clients, to an entry he had never called before, one that had been placed there by his grandfather's lawyer on the day the trust was explained to him. Davies, Marcus, fiduciary. He pressed the call button, the phone cool against his ear. The sounds of the party were a distant, muffled beat, the soundtrack to a world he no longer inhabited. The phone rang twice, a crisp, professional tone, before a calm, measured voice answered. Marcus Davies. There was no preamble, no wasted pleasantries. Ethan's own voice, when it came, was a low, controlled rasp he barely recognized as his own. Mr. Davies, this is Ethan Cole. I apologize for the late hour, but I need to invoke the Protective Measures Clause of the Alastair Cole Trust, effective immediately. There was a brief, fractional pause on the other end of the line, not of surprise, but of a mind processing complex information at high speed. Understood, Mr. Cole. Am I correct to assume this pertains to a potential marital dissolution action and the immediate safeguarding of non-commingled, premarital and inherited assets? The legal jargon, so cold and precise, was a comfort, a shield against the hot, messy emotions of betrayal. That is correct, Ethan said, the words feeling like steel in his mouth. I need you to execute the full financial firewall protocol. I am transferring the designated liquid assets from the primary trust account to the ancillary holding account, the one established under my name only. I need you to lock down any and all lines of credit associated with my name that are linked to joint accounts, and prepare an immediate and comprehensive asset declaration. I also need you to engage the services of the best divorce litigator in San Francisco, someone formidable. Mr. Davies's voice was the epitome of calm efficiency. Consider it done, Mr. Cole. The transfers will be time-stamped as of this moment. The accounts will be secured within the next 5 minutes. I have a litigator in mind, a barracuda named Helena Vance. She eats NDAs for breakfast. I will have her on retainer by morning. Ethan closed his eyes, the scent of old leather filling his senses. The first stone of his new foundation had just been set, silently and in the dark, and he knew it was a stone that could never be moved. He ended the call with a quiet, "Thank you," and immediately opened his banking application. It was not the simple app for his small business account, but a different one, a secure portal provided by the private bank that managed his grandfather's trust. The icon was a discrete, featureless black square. Access required a multi-stage verification process, a complex password, a facial scan, and finally, his thumbprint, the whorls and ridges of his calloused skin, a unique key to a kingdom Genevieve never knew existed. The screen resolved into a clean, minimalist interface, displaying a series of accounts and investment portfolios. The numbers were staggering, a constellation of digits that seemed to shimmer with an unreal light. For years, he had lived as if this money didn't exist, honoring his grandfather's wish that he first build a life of his own. He had respected the wealth, but he had never truly felt its power. Now, he felt it as a tangible force, a weapon he was about to wield with surgical precision. Following Mr. Davies's instructions, he navigated to the primary distribution account, the one from which the trust paid its quarterly income. He initiated a transfer, his thumb hovering over the keypad. He typed in a figure, a sum large enough to cover the evening's astronomical expenses 10 times over, and directed it to the secure ancillary account that was legally and unequivocally his alone. The application prompted him for a final confirmation. A small, glowing button appeared on the screen. Execute transfer. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. This was the point of no return. This single action was a declaration of war, a silent severing of the financial ties that had, however tenuously, bound him to Genevieve. He thought of her face, twisted in irritation as she ordered him to put on a servant's jacket. He thought of the cold, dismissive language in the divorce papers she had hidden in her purse. He thought of her mocking laughter when he spoke of his grandfather. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a glacial resolve. His thumb pressed down firmly on the cold glass. The screen flickered for a second, and then a simple message appeared in green letters. Transaction complete. He had just moved a fortune, an act that would have taken a team of brokers and bankers weeks to accomplish in a bygone era, and he had done it silently, in a dusty tack room, with the press of a single finger. The drawbridge to his fortress had been raised and locked, and Genevieve was now, officially and irrevocably, on the outside. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The smooth, cool glass, a stark contrast to the rough fabric of his trousers. The man who stood up from the wooden bench was not the same one who had entered the tack room moments before. The shock had been cauterized, the pain transmuted into a chillingly clear purpose. He was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of betrayal. He was a general who had just received critical intelligence, secured his supply lines, and was now preparing to rejoin the battle on his own terms. He walked out of the barn and back toward the glittering lights of the party. The sounds grew louder, the music more insistent, the laughter more brittle. He saw the world she had created not as a source of intimidation or inadequacy, but as a fragile, hollow construct, a stage set built with borrowed money and fleeting alliances. He returned to the catering tent, the air still thick with the smells of work and stress. He found his discarded navy wool jacket and put it back on, shrugging off the cheap, ill-fitting polyester of the server's uniform. He left the borrowed jacket folded neatly on a chair, a symbolic shedding of the role she had tried to force upon him. He was done being the help. He was done blending in. He was done being invisible. He walked to the edge of the terrace, a ghost rematerializing into the world of the living. He stood in the shadows of a massive oak tree, its ancient gnarled branches a testament to endurance, and he watched. He was no longer a participant, but an observer, an anthropologist studying the bizarre rituals of a foreign tribe. He saw the frantic networking, the air kisses that never landed, the smiles that never reached the eyes. He saw the desperate, hungry ambition in the faces of men and women who held immense power, yet seemed to possess no real joy. They were all playing a part, just like Genevieve. The difference was, he now knew the play was a tragedy, and he was the only one who had read the final act. He looked for his wife, and found her easily. She was holding court near the grand fireplace, a shimmering silver comet at the center of her own universe, completely unaware that her world was about to be plunged into a permanent, icy darkness. He focused on her, his gaze unwavering, his mind a cold, analytical engine. He watched her as she spoke to a tech mogul, a man whose net worth was discussed in the same reverent tones once reserved for deities. He saw the way she tilted her head, a gesture of rapt attention he had once found endearing, and now recognized as a meticulously practiced tool of manipulation. He saw the way her fingers, adorned with the diamond ring he had saved for 2 years to buy, lightly brushed the mogul's arm, a fleeting, calculated touch designed to create a sense of intimacy and connection. He could almost hear her voice, the carefully modulated cadence she used when she wanted to impress someone, a voice that was a world away from the sharp, dismissive tone she reserved for him. He saw her glance around the terrace, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, not in search of him, but in a constant anxious assessment of her own success. She was counting the number of important faces, gauging the mood, ensuring her investment was paying off. He was not a factor in her equation. He was a variable that had already been solved for and discarded. As he watched, a waiter approached her with a fresh glass of champagne. She took it without looking at the young man, her eyes remaining locked on her billionaire target. The casual, unthinking dismissal was a small thing, a minor detail in the grand tapestry of the evening. But for Ethan, it was a lightning flash of clarity. He saw himself in that waiter. He saw the countless times she had taken his support, his loyalty, his love, without a word of thanks, without a flicker of acknowledgement, as if it were simply her due. He had been the invisible servant in their marriage for years, and he had been too blind, or perhaps too willing, to see it. The pity he had felt for her earlier was gone, burned away by the cold fire of this new understanding. She wasn't a woman drowning in a sea of her own making. She was the architect of that sea, and she had fully intended for him to be the one to drown. He felt the heavy, solid weight of his grandfather's watch on his wrist, the steady tick-tock, a rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic, hollow beat of the party. It was a reminder of a different set of values, a different way of measuring a life. His grandfather had built his world on rock. Genevieve had built hers on sand, and the tide was finally coming in. He knew he could not execute the final phase of his plan alone. He needed his co-conspirator, the silent, loyal guardian of his grandfather's legacy. He scanned the perimeter of the party, a landscape of shimmering gowns and dark tuxedos, looking for the one man who, like him, did not belong to this world of artifice. He found him standing near the stone balustrade overlooking the valley, a tall, still figure outlined against the deepening twilight. Mr. Albright was not watching the guests. He was watching the land, his expression one of quiet, proprietary concern, the look of a man who understands the soul of a place. Ethan moved toward him, his path weaving through clusters of laughing, drinking people who paid him no mind. He felt a strange sense of power in his renewed visibility. He was no longer hiding, yet he remained unseen, moving through their world like a specter. He reached Albright's side, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood together, two stewards of the same legacy, looking out at the rows of vines that stretched into the darkness. The air between them was filled with a complete and unspoken understanding. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and calm, barely audible above the distant music. "Mr. Albright, she is preparing to give a speech." Albright did not turn his head, his gaze remaining fixed on the horizon. "I assumed she would," he replied, his tone dry and devoid of surprise. "A performance of this magnitude requires a monologue." Ethan took a breath. "After she is finished, I need you to go to the stage. I need you to take the microphone and make an announcement." He paused, choosing his next words with the same care he would use to place a keystone in an arch. "You will thank her, and then you will introduce the new proprietor of the Blackwood estate." For the first time, Albright turned to look at him. In the dim, golden light from the terrace, Ethan saw a flicker of something in the older man's eyes. Not just loyalty, but a deep, profound satisfaction, the look of a man who has waited years for a long overdue justice to be served. There was no need for further explanation. Albright had witnessed Genevieve's arrogance, had fielded her imperious demands, had seen the mountain of invoices she had generated with a casual, entitled wave of her hand. He understood everything. He gave a single, sharp nod, a gesture of absolute allegiance. "It will be my distinct pleasure, Mr. Cole." The pact was sealed, the final piece of the mechanism clicking silently and perfectly into place. He left Mr. Albright at the balustrade and melted back into the periphery of the party, his heart a steady, heavy drum in his chest. The adrenaline of his discovery and the subsequent phone calls had subsided, replaced by a profound, almost preternatural calm. He was an actor waiting in the wings, his lines memorized, his motivation absolute, listening for his cue. He watched as the string quartet finished their piece to a smattering of polite applause. He saw Genevieve detach herself from the tech mogul with a final, dazzling smile, and move toward the small, elegantly lit stage that had been set up on the main terrace. A hush began to fall over the crowd as she took the microphone, the guests turning their attention toward her, their faces expectant. She was radiant under the soft lights, a vision of triumph and grace, the absolute master of her universe. She tapped the microphone, a small theatrical gesture, and the last murmurs of conversation died away. She looked out at the sea of powerful, influential faces she had so desperately courted, and her smile was one of pure, unadulterated victory. As she prepared to speak, her gaze swept across the crowd one last time, a queen surveying her subjects. Her eyes met his, standing in the shadows at the edge of the light. He did not look away. He did not flinch. He simply held her gaze. For a fraction of a second, he saw a flicker of something in her expression, a tiny, almost imperceptible flash of annoyance, of dismissal, the look one might give a piece of furniture that is slightly out of place. It was the last time she would ever look at him as an inferior. That single, fleeting glance was the final confirmation, the last drop of fuel on the cold fire of his resolve. He felt the weight of his grandfather's legacy, the solid steel of the watch on his wrist, the unshakable truth of the documents hidden in the dusty office, and he knew, with uncertainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was about to give her everything she deserved. Her voice, smooth as silk and amplified by the speakers, filled the night air. "My dearest friends," she began, "welcome. When I first dreamed of this night, I never imagined the trap was set, the bait had been taken, and the world she had so carefully constructed was only moments away from being utterly and completely annihilated." Her voice, a carefully modulated instrument of practiced sincerity, flowed from the speakers and washed over the terrace, a silken tide designed to mesmerize and enchant. "My dearest friends," she began, her tone a perfect blend of humility and triumph, "welcome. When I first dreamed of this night, of celebrating a decade of love and partnership in this magical place, I never truly believed it could be possible." Ethan stood in the penumbra of a great oak, a silent observer watching a masterful performance. He dissected every word, every gesture, recognizing the intricate architecture of her lies. The dream she spoke of was not one of partnership, but of conquest. The magic was not in the love they shared, but in the price tag of the venue and the net worth of her guests. He could smell the cloying sweetness of the night-blooming jasmine mingling with the yeasty aroma of the champagne, a combination that suddenly seemed suffocating, the scent of decay masked by perfume. He watched the faces in the crowd, a sea of polite, appreciative smiles. They were captivated. They saw a woman at the zenith of her success, a gracious, beautiful hostess who had manifested her own destiny. They saw a story of ambition fulfilled, a narrative they understood and admired. They did not see the mountain of debt hidden behind the floral arrangements, nor the cold, calculating heart that beat beneath the shimmering silver fabric of her gown. "This journey," she continued, her voice catching with a flawlessly executed tremor of emotion, "has been one of immense struggle and sacrifice. We started with nothing but a shared dream." A bitter, silent laugh caught in Ethan's throat. He remembered their nothing. It had been his nothing, his small apartment, his steady income from the landscaping business that had paid their bills while she interned for free at a gallery, building the connections she was now leveraging. His sacrifice had been the raw material for her success, a fact she had conveniently edited from this public version of their history. He looked at his hands, the calluses and ingrained dirt invisible in the dim light, and felt a sudden, profound disconnect from the man she was describing. He was a ghost at his own life story's premiere. Her gaze swept the crowd, a queen acknowledging her court, and then, as if drawn by a magnetic force of her own design, her eyes found his. The warm, grateful smile she wore for the audience did not falter, but he saw a subtle shift, a hardening in their depths, a flicker of the same irritation he'd seen earlier. She was not looking at her husband. She was looking at her final, inconvenient loose end, the last piece of business to be attended to before her victory was complete. "And of course," she said, her voice now dripping with a condescending tenderness that made his skin crawl, "I could not have done any of this without my husband, my rock. Ethan, darling, would you please join me?" The invitation was a command, and the silence that followed was the sound of the trap being sprung. The world seemed to slow down, the ambient sounds of the party, the clinking of glasses, the distant murmur of the quartet, fading into a dull, low hum. Every eye on the terrace swiveled to find him, 100 pairs of curious, assessing gazes landing on the man in the simple suit standing in the shadows. He felt their collective judgment, their unspoken questions. This was the husband of the radiant Genevieve? This quiet, unassuming man who looked more like he belonged in the vineyard than on the terrace? For a paralyzing moment, he was the boy from the small town again, acutely aware of his rough hands and his lack of pedigree. But then, he felt the solid, reassuring weight of his grandfather's watch on his wrist, its steady ticking a silent reminder of who he was, of the bedrock of integrity and quiet strength that lay beneath the surface. He pushed off from the oak tree, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He walked from the darkness into the golden light of the stage, each step a conscious act of will. The grass was soft and cool beneath his leather-soled shoes. He could smell the faint, metallic scent of the electronic equipment on the stage, a sterile odor that cut through the perfumed air. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at her. As he approached, her smile widened, a brilliant, predatory baring of teeth. It was a smile of absolute triumph, the look of a chess master who has just maneuvered her opponent into an inescapable checkmate. "Darling," she whispered. The microphone held slightly away from her lips so only he could hear. The endearment, a venomous hiss. "Just one more thing, for the photographers." She turned to a small table beside the lectern and picked up a familiar crimson folder. It was the folder from her purse. His heart, which had been beating with a slow, heavy rhythm, gave a single, painful thud. She held it out to him, its glossy cover reflecting the stage lights. "A little surprise," she announced to the audience, her voice bright and full of theatrical love. "We decided that for our 10th anniversary, we wouldn't just renew our vows. We would renew our commitment to our future, to our shared dreams. A little legal formality, to reaffirm everything." She opened the folder to the last page, where his name was typed neatly above the signature line, and offered him a pen, a heavy, obscenely expensive Montblanc fountain pen. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal, please like this video so we can continue bringing you tales where karma is the final judge. He took the pen, its cold, polished surface feeling alien and unnatural in his calloused hand. The weight of her deception, a physical thing pressing down on him. He looked down at the paper, the crisp, heavy stock, a testament to the expense and seriousness of its purpose. The words blurred for a second, the dense paragraphs of legalese swimming before his eyes, but he didn't need to read them. He had already read them in the shadows of the alcove, their cruel meaning seared into his memory. He saw the clauses that would strip him of his home, the NDA that would buy his silence, the insulting pittance offered as a final severance. This was not a reaffirmation of their vows. It was the execution order for their marriage, and she was asking him to sign it in front of a captive audience, disguised as an act of love. It was a move of such breathtaking cruelty, such audacious arrogance, that a part of him felt a detached, clinical admiration for its sheer villainy. She had constructed the perfect public execution, one where the victim was made to smile and thank the executioner. He could feel her standing beside him, her presence a radiating field of triumphant energy. He could smell her perfume, that aggressive tuberose and sandalwood scent, an aroma he would forever associate with the deepest betrayal. He looked at the signature line again. Ethan Cole, his name. A name he shared with his grandfather, Alistair Cole, the man she had mocked, the man whose legacy she was unknowingly standing upon. He thought of the phone call to Marcus Davies, the quiet efficiency in the fiduciary's voice. He thought of the fortune he had moved with a single press of his thumb, a silent, digital act of war. He thought of Helena Vance, the Barracuda lawyer who ate NDAs for breakfast. He was not the defenseless man she believed him to be. He was not the simple gardener, out of his depth and easily discarded. He was a fortress she couldn't see, with defenses she couldn't possibly comprehend. He lifted the heavy pen. The nib, crafted from gold, hovered over the paper. He could feel the eyes of the crowd, the expectant hush, the soft click of a photographer's camera. He glanced at Genevieve. Her eyes were gleaming, a mixture of impatience and ecstatic victory. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent command. Sign it. End this. Disappear. He took a slow, deep breath, the air tasting of champagne and ashes, and pressed the pen to the page. The ink flowed, a dark, rich black, and he began to write his name, each letter a deliberate, controlled stroke, not of surrender, but of final, irrevocable consent to the battle she had just unknowingly begun. He finished his signature with a firm, decisive flourish, the final stroke of the E, a sharp, definitive line. The sound of the pen scratching across the heavy paper was a soft, intimate secret in the vast public silence of the terrace. He capped the Mont Blanc with a quiet, satisfying click and placed it deliberately next to the folder. He had done it. He had played his part in her grotesque theater, signed his own death warrant as she saw it, and in doing so, had armed himself for the war to come. He closed the crimson folder, the cover cool and smooth beneath his fingertips, and held it for a beat. He looked directly into Genevieve's eyes, and for the first time that evening, he allowed a flicker of his true feelings to show. Not anger, not sadness, but a profound and chilling emptiness, the look of a man gazing upon a complete stranger. She didn't see it, or perhaps she chose not to. Her face was alight with a joy so pure and triumphant it was almost beatific. She believed she had won everything. She had secured her future, guaranteed his silence, and had done it all on a stage of her own making, applauded by the very people whose approval she craved more than air. She took the folder from his hand, her fingers brushing his in a gesture of final, dismissive transaction. She clutched it to her chest like a sacred text, a trophy that symbolized her ultimate ascension. "Thank you, darling," she murmured, the words a soft poison meant only for him. Then, for the benefit of the audience, she leaned in and placed a cold, dry kiss on his cheek. It was the kiss of Judas, a public gesture of affection that was, in reality, a seal of betrayal. She gave his arm a condescending pat, a gesture one might give to a loyal dog or a departing servant, and turned back to the microphone, dismissing him completely. He turned and walked off the stage, his back straight, his head held high. He did not feel shame. He did not feel defeated. He felt a strange and terrible lightness, the calm of a man who has just walked through fire and emerged on the other side, changed but whole. He moved back to his vantage point under the great oak, melting into the shadows once more. He watched her raise the crimson folder high for all to see, a triumphant salute to her own brilliance. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that washed over the valley, celebrating a victory that was a complete and utter illusion. As the applause began to fade, a new figure began to move toward the stage, a tall, silver-haired man walking with a slow, deliberate, and righteous purpose. The final act was about to begin. The applause, a wave of polite, conditioned approval for Genevieve's performance, began to recede, leaving a delicate, self-congratulatory hum in its wake. But the silence that should have followed was broken by a new sound, a sound that did not belong to the carefully curated score of the evening. It was the soft, deliberate tread of expensive leather shoes on the stone steps leading to the stage. Mr. Albright moved not with the hurried efficiency of the event staff, but with the unshakable gravity of a man who owned the very ground he walked upon. He was a figure from a different era, his tailored tweed suit a stark, earthy contrast to the glittering sea of modern tuxedos. The light caught the silver at his temples, making him seem like a monument of quiet dignity. A confused murmur rippled through the front rows of the crowd. This was not on the program. Genevieve, who had been basking in the afterglow of her speech, the crimson folder held to her chest like a holy relic, turned her head. Her beatific smile faltered, tightening at the edges as she registered the intrusion. A flicker of pure, unadulterated annoyance crossed her face. The look of a director whose meticulously blocked scene was being ruined by an extra who had missed his cue. She opened her mouth to say something, to discreetly dismiss him, but Albright reached the microphone first. He did not grab it, but simply placed a steadying hand on the stand, a gesture of calm, absolute authority. He adjusted it slightly, the small metallic scrape amplified by the speakers, a sound that cut through the lingering chatter and commanded an immediate, uneasy silence. Ethan watched from the shadows, his heart a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. He saw the shift in the crowd, the way they leaned forward, their instincts telling them that the real performance was only just beginning. "Thank you, Genevieve," Mr. Albright began, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that carried across the terrace with the weight of decades of authority. It was a voice that held no deference, only a polite, formal finality. That was a memorable speech. There is, however, just one final piece of programming for the evening, an unscheduled but necessary announcement. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, his gaze sweeping over the sea of confused, powerful faces. He was in complete control. Genevieve's annoyance was now visibly curdling into alarm, her knuckles white where she gripped the folder. She had lost control of her own stage. Albright turned his gaze slightly, looking not at the crowd, but past them, toward the service entrance, toward the shadows beneath the great oak. "We'd like to take this opportunity to formally introduce you all to the new proprietor of the Blackwood estate." The words hung in the cool night air, heavy and implacable. The new proprietor. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the audience. Whispers erupted like wildfire, a frantic, sibilant sound of speculation and shock. The tech billionaires and shipping heiresses, people who traded in secrets and acquisitions, turned to one another, their faces masks of naked, hungry curiosity. This was not part of the social performance. This was real news, a shift in power, the only currency that truly mattered in their world. Genevieve stood frozen, her face a canvas of utter bewilderment. Her mind, so quick and calculating, was visibly struggling to process this new, impossible variable. The Blackwood estate was owned by a reclusive, old-money consortium. It wasn't for sale. She had spent months dealing with their lawyers, their faceless representatives. This introduction, this public announcement at her event, was an ambush, an inexplicable hijacking of her moment of ultimate triumph. Her eyes darted around, searching for an explanation, for someone to blame, for a way to regain control. Her gaze fell on Mr. Albright, but he was no longer looking at her. His attention was fixed on the edge of the terrace, his expression one of profound, unwavering respect. "Please join me in welcoming," he announced, his voice clear and strong, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of Genevieve's world. Mr. Ethan Cole. Time stopped. The universe of the party, with its intricate orbits of status and influence, seemed to freeze in its rotation. For a long, silent moment, nothing happened. And then, a figure detached itself from the shadows. Ethan handed his silver tray, still holding a single untouched flute of champagne, to a young waiter whose jaw was hanging open in slack-jawed disbelief. With a slow, deliberate motion, Ethan shrugged off the ill-fitting black polyester jacket, the uniform of his humiliation, and let it fall to the grass. He smoothed the lapels of his own simple navy wool suit, the fabric feeling like an old and trusted friend. And then he began to walk toward the stage. The silence that fell over the crowd was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the terrace. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. They watched the man they had ignored all night, the man they had looked through, the servant who had filled their glasses, as he walked out of the darkness and into the light, his steps as steady and solid as the earth beneath his feet. He saw only Genevieve. The confusion on her face had been wiped away, replaced by a dawning horror so profound it seemed to physically diminish her, the shimmering silver gown suddenly looking like a cheap, hollow shell. A single, sharp, strangled gasp escaped her lips, a sound that was swallowed by the vast, terrible silence. He ascended the steps and took the microphone from the stand, his calloused hands, the hands of a man who builds things, looking impossibly steady as they closed around the instrument of her undoing. He held the microphone, its metal cool and solid in his grasp. It felt like a tool, and he knew exactly how to use it. He did not look at Genevieve. Not yet. He looked out at the sea of stunned, silent faces, the powerful and the privileged, who were now hanging on his every word. He could smell their fear and confusion, a sharp metallic scent that cut through the sweet perfume of the night. It was the smell of a carefully ordered world that had just been irrevocably upended. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the speakers to carry to the furthest corners of the terrace. It was not the voice of a servant, nor the voice of a humiliated husband. It was the voice of a man in complete and total command. "I appreciate you taking the time to celebrate this occasion." He let a small, ironic pause hang in the air before continuing, his tone shifting from polite to definitive. "But the party is over. You may consider your obligations as guests fulfilled." A new wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, a sound of frantic, disbelieving whispers. He had just dismissed them. He had dismissed the most powerful people in the city as if they were children being sent home from a playground. He finally turned his gaze to his wife. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and incandescent rage. The beautiful mask had been completely incinerated, revealing the raw, desperate ambition beneath. He lowered his voice slightly, a gesture of feigned intimacy that was more brutal than a shout, yet still audible to the straining ears in the front rows. "Genevieve," he said, her name a simple, cold fact. "You were always so worried about our finances, so concerned with protecting your future. On our wedding day, you insisted on an ironclad prenuptial agreement to protect your assets from my limited means." He looked down at his own hands, then back at her. "I agreed. What you didn't know is that my grandfather, the man you always mocked as that dirt-poor farmer from nowhere, was Alistair Cole." He let his grandfather's name settle in the air, watching as the recognition dawned on the faces of the older guests, the ones who knew the history of Napa Valley. He saw a flicker of comprehension, of sheer horror in Genevieve's eyes. He was the founder of this estate. He bought this land when it was nothing but dust and scrub oak and built it into what it is today. And when he passed, he left it all to me, an $80 million trust. He looked out at the crowd, his voice rising again to its full, clear volume. "The bill for tonight's event is substantial. The champagne you insisted on, the custom ice sculptures, the fee for the string quartet from the Philharmonic, it all adds up. Mr. Albright will be forwarding the final, itemized invoice directly to you, Genevieve. I believe your lawyer has your current address." He placed the microphone back in its stand with a soft, final click, leaving her frozen in her designer gown, a monument to her own ambition, publicly and catastrophically ruined in the very world she had sacrificed everything, including her soul, to conquer. The click of the microphone being set in its stand echoed across the terrace like a gunshot, shattering the last vestiges of the evening's illusion. For a long, terrible moment, there was no sound at all, only the sight of Genevieve, a shimmering statue of ruin, her face a ghastly white under the golden stage lights. The crimson folder, her supposed trophy of victory, slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the stage with a soft, pathetic flutter. The divorce papers, her blueprint for his erasure, lay exposed at her feet. Then, the spell broke. The silence was replaced not by applause, but by a frantic, chaotic scramble. The social ecosystem, built on proximity to power and the ruthless avoidance of failure, was collapsing in real time. The guests, who moments before had been her adoring subjects, were now a panicked mob, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of her social annihilation. The air filled with the sound of hurried apologies, the rustle of silk, the crunch of gravel as the city's elite fled to their cars as if escaping a contagion. They didn't look at her, their eyes averted, their faces grim. To be associated with this level of public humiliation was a stain they could not afford. But before Genevieve could move, before she could even process the full scope of her destruction, a new figure approached the stage. It was a woman in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, her stride confident and predatory. She was flanked by two associates, both carrying thick leather briefcases. Ethan recognized her immediately from the file Marcus Davies had sent him. Helena Vance, the Barracuda. She ascended the steps, her heels making a sharp, decisive sound, and stopped directly in front of Genevieve. She didn't offer a hand. She offered a thick, professionally bound document. "Mrs. Cole," Helena said, her voice devoid of any emotion, a surgeon stating a diagnosis. "My name is Helena Vance. I represent Mr. Ethan Cole in the matter of your marital dissolution. You are being served." She placed the documents into Genevieve's unresisting hand. "You will also find a temporary restraining order, preventing you from liquidating or transferring any assets, and a notice that our forensic accounting team will be subpoenaing your gallery's financial records tomorrow morning to trace the source of funds for tonight's event. I'd advise you to find legal counsel immediately." Helena turned and walked away, her mission accomplished with brutal efficiency. Ethan stood by the balustrade watching the last of the cars snake down the long driveway, their taillights disappearing into the darkness. He looked at the empty terrace, a battlefield littered with abandoned champagne flutes and shattered dreams, and then at the endless, patient rows of vines stretching out under the moon. He had not won a fortune. He had simply claimed the inheritance that truly mattered, the quiet, unshakable truth of his grandfather's wisdom. A legacy built not on illusion, but on the rich, dark, and honest earth. The silence that descended upon the terrace was more profound and damning than any scream. It was a vacuum, filled only by the whisper of the wind through the ancient olive trees and the distant, lonely chirp of a cricket, sounds that had been there all along, patiently waiting for the human noise to cease. The wreckage of the party lay scattered like the aftermath of a sudden, violent storm. Half-empty glasses of champagne, their bubbles long dead, stood on tables next to crumpled linen napkins stained with lipstick. A single, overturned chair lay on its side, a silent testament to a hasty departure. The golden lights, which had once created an atmosphere of magical elegance, now seemed harsh and theatrical, illuminating a scene of profound and pathetic desolation. Ethan stood by the stone balustrade, his back to the stage, and looked out over the valley. The land was dark, peaceful, and eternal. The neat, orderly rows of vines stretched into the darkness, a living testament to his grandfather's patience and foresight. He could smell the rich, damp earth on the night air, a clean, honest scent that was a welcome antidote to the cloying, stale perfume of the party. He felt no triumph, no thrill of victory. The cold, clarifying rage that had sustained him had receded, leaving behind a deep, quiet ache and a sense of solemn, heavy responsibility. He had not destroyed a monster. He had simply held up a mirror to a woman who was so lost, so consumed by her own manufactured image, that she had become a stranger to herself. He turned, his movements slow and deliberate, and looked at her one last time. Genevieve was still on the stage, a solitary figure in the vast emptiness. She had sunk to her knees, her shimmering silver gown pooling around her like liquid metal. The divorce papers lay scattered around her, stark white against the dark wood of the stage. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and her shoulders were shaking with silent, racking sobs. She was no longer the radiant queen of her social universe, but a small, broken thing. A child who had built a magnificent sandcastle only to watch the tide wash it all away. He felt a flicker of something in his chest, a ghost of the love he had once felt for the ambitious, vibrant woman he had married, and it was a feeling not of anger, but of a profound and bottomless pity. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that there were no words left to say. Their shared language was dead. He turned his back on the stage, on the wreckage of their marriage, and on the hollow world she had so desperately tried to conquer. And he began to walk, not toward the exit, but toward the dark, silent heart of the vineyard. He was leaving behind the ghost of a life he thought he wanted, walking toward the solid, living legacy that had been waiting for him all along. He did not sleep. As the first pale fingers of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, he was already walking the rows of vines, his simple leather work boots damp with dew. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint green promise of the grapes. The mist hung low in the valley, shrouding the world in a soft, ethereal silence, broken only by the waking chorus of the birds. He reached the highest point of the vineyard, a small knoll where a single, ancient oak tree stood sentinel, and he watched as the sun rose, painting the sky in strokes of soft pink and brilliant gold. This was real. The quiet, steady rhythm of the seasons, the patient strength of the vines, the solid earth beneath his feet. This was the wealth his grandfather had truly left him. The money, the $80 million trust, was merely a tool, a means to protect and nurture this living legacy. He reached down and scooped up a handful of the rich, dark soil. It was cool and crumbly in his palm, a texture more familiar and comforting to him than the finest silk. He brought it to his nose, inhaling the deep, loamy scent of life and potential. This was where he belonged. He let the soil fall through his fingers and walked back to the small, dusty pump house office, the true seat of power on this estate. Inside, in the quiet, comforting scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, he sat at his grandfather's desk. He opened the old ledger, its pages filled with the elegant, spidery script, and traced the lines with his finger, reading not just about harvests and rainfall, but about a life of purpose, patience, and integrity. The heavy steel watch on his wrist ticked with a steady, reassuring rhythm, a heartbeat connecting him across time to the man who had built all this. He thought of Genevieve, a fleeting, distant memory now, a cautionary tale of a life spent chasing the glittering, hollow reflection of success instead of building a foundation of true value. He had learned the hard way that a person's worth is not measured by the label on their suit or the balance in their bank account, but by the strength of their character and the honesty of their work. His hands, calloused and stained with the earth, were not a symbol of a small life, but the mark of a man who understood the profound and enduring difference between having a price and having a value.